He masked his face and kept his gloves on for the camera. He scouted the property for weeks, maybe longer. He knew exactly where the lenses were pointed. He knew the light layout. He timed his movement. He cut what needed cutting and hid what needed hiding. By every metric police used to track professional hits, the level of strategy, the prep work, and the final move at Nancy Guthrie's Tucson home was not some random act. It was not messy. This was not the work of someone losing their cool or acting out of desperation. This was a blueprint. It was orchestrated. Someone sat down long before that night and mapped out every single phase of this before they pulled the trigger. This is exactly why a detail from Ashley Banfield's March 31st episode of Drop Dead Serious hits much harder than anything we have heard lately. Because here is the truth about people who plan this carefully. They prepare for the risks they can see and the threats they have already scouted in advance. But every strategy has a breaking point where the preparation ends and the real world takes over. If those sources are right, that breaking point happened on the dark back patio before he ever pulled on his gloves. There is a massive question about this evidence that has not been asked in public yet. A question hidden in the space between what the front doorbell caught and what happened in the backyard before he ever stepped into the frame. An answer that might be chilling in a crime lab right now, just waiting for DNA technology to finally bridge the gap. Stick with us because this is the one detail that flips the entire script. Once you see it, you cannot ignore it. For those who have been following our Nancy Guthrie coverage, you already know the basics. You know exactly who Nancy is. The mother of today's show's Savannah Guthrie, snatched from her Tucson home in early 2026. This is not a cold case. This is wide open. The FBI and Pima County investigators are both heavily involved. The info on this case is locked down tight, yet it is leaking more than any big-name kidnapping we have seen in years. You have watched us break down the blood evidence and what it really says about that night. We have talked about the possibility of an insider having access. The theory that whoever did this knew the house better than any random stalker ever could. You have seen us go through the clothes found in the desert wash behind Nancy Guthrie's place, found by a volunteer with Jim Seuss, details the sheriff has not even touched publicly. We have covered the second ransom note and the trust issues surrounding Sheriff Nanos, and that Pima County deputy busted for a different kidnapping, a timeline that the authorities still cannot explain away. You do not need a recap of this case. You are not a newcomer. You have been here for every twist and turn so far. But you have not heard the real meaning behind that detail from the March 31st episode of Drop Dead Serious. Let's set the stage properly. Because to get why this is such a big deal, you have to see the structure of this crime and exactly where the holes are. Just one thing. Before we dive in, a quick note. We are not here to exploit a family's pain. We are here because when a woman is taken and the story keeps changing, someone needs to ask the hard questions that the media is ignoring. That is our job. The question we are raising today has not been mentioned anywhere else. That is why we are here. Look at how this was pulled off. Let's start with what the confirmed facts tell us. This was a midnight run designed to keep him in the shadows. He dealt with the outdoor lights beforehand, either cutting them or avoiding them during his approach. The result was zero visibility at the worst times. The cameras that should have caught him were basically useless. That is not just luck. That is homework being put into practice. The suspect eventually hit the front door and triggered the camera. The FBI confirmed that video exists and released it. You have seen it if you are watching this. Take a look at the silhouette and the hand gear. What's missing completely by design is a clear shot of the person's face. The rear of the house served as the main entrance for the whole job. A couple of back entrances and a gate had to be kept open for the next phase of the plan to work. Based on Banfield's inside sources, which we'll cover in a bit, those doors were propped open with random stuff from the yard. Specifically, they used Nancy's own flower pots from her back porch. Let's pause there because that specific location is a massive clue in this mystery. We're talking about the back patio, not the front or the side. That's the one spot the doorbell camera can't see. That's the blind zone where the individual was busy before stepping into the camera's view with gloves already on. It looks like the whole physical operation actually kicked off right there on that back porch. That's where someone was grabbing, lifting, and shifting heavy items around. Those things were moved by someone who wasn't Nancy Guthrie or anyone officially linked to this investigation. That sets the stage for today. We're diving into the glove evidence, the facts versus the theories. We need to be precise here because the gap between hard proof and speculation changes how you see the whole story. It's a fact verified by the FBI. The individual was definitely covered up when the doorbell camera caught him. There's no debating this. Multiple sources confirmed what's clearly visible on that tape. You can see it for yourself. The Pima County Sheriff's Department put it in their March 4th brief. Authorities found a pair of gloves about 2 miles away from Nancy Guthrie's residence. Those were linked to a local cook who was cleared after an investigation. They had nothing to do with the case. Those weren't the suspects, so he was covered at the door. The FBI footage proves that much. A different pair found miles away belonged to someone else. Case closed on that specific lead. Now here's what we don't know. This part hasn't been mentioned in any briefing or official report we've found. The big question is, at what point did he put those gloves on? It's not about whether he had them, he did. And he was clearly careful about being seen by the lens. He was disciplined, sure, but when exactly did those gloves become part of his gear that night? There is a huge difference between a professional who geared up before ever setting foot on the lawn, someone who ensured their skin never touched a single surface during the entire job, and someone who just made a tactical choice to cover up once they hit the camera's view. We know he was covered for the front camera. The video shows his hands were hidden. But what about the dark? Before the camera saw him at the gate or the porch, was he barehanded then? There's a second part to this mystery that's just as vital and hasn't been addressed. What kind of gloves were they? Thick work gear or thin medical-style ones? That detail changes the forensic math. Heavy-duty work gloves are great for blocking prints. However, sweat or skin cells can still leak through them. Now thin latex or nitrile ones. They trap DNA better, but they're prone to small rips when you're grabbing rough outdoor objects. Neither the type nor the timing of the gloves has been officially confirmed by the police. We know he was covered in the footage, and we know those other gloves were a dead end. Everything in between those 2 points is a massive unknown. When you're dealing with DNA and genetic genealogy, these aren't just small details. They tell us if the lab samples came from a direct touch or a protected one. Let's look at the DNA evidence and what the PCSD has officially stated. The Sheriff's Department publicly confirmed that biological evidence was found at the Guthrie home. It wasn't Nancy's, and it didn't belong to anyone in her inner circle or household. It wasn't from any of the people the police would have ruled out first in a case like this. It's an outsider's profile, and they've already run it through the national database, CODIS. The FBI runs a massive federal database packed with DNA records from convicted criminals and various detainees. It also tracks forensic evidence from crime scenes nationwide. Despite 21 million entries, this search came up empty. Now investigators are shifting gears to explore genetic genealogy as their next major lead. Let's look closer at that database failure because it is far from a dead end for this case. While powerful, that federal system is not all-seeing. You only land in that system if you've been busted for specific crimes or had DNA logged during a prior arrest. If you have never been processed by the criminal justice system in a way that requires a swab, or if you had no criminal record before the incident at Nancy Guthrie's home, the database cannot find you. It is strictly limited to identifying people it has already encountered. Striking out doesn't mean the suspect is a ghost. It just means the standard police playbook hit a wall. The mission now requires a different strategy. That is where genetic genealogy enters the picture. Genetic genealogy is the ultimate game-changing tool for modern investigations. This method gained worldwide fame when it finally unmasked the Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo. He was caught in 2018 after decades of total silence. Since then, the technology has exploded. It has successfully cracked dozens of cold cases that sat untouched for 20, 30, or even 40 years. Here is the process. Detectives take the mystery DNA from the sample that failed the federal search. They upload that profile to public genealogy sites like the well-known platform GEDmatch. This is a place where everyday people voluntarily share their DNA results to map out their ancestry. With millions of profiles available, the unknown sample is compared against all those voluntary uploads. The system hunts for partial matches, the genetic links typically found between biological relatives. It is not looking for a direct hit, but a lead pointing to a specific family tree. Expert genealogists and specialized investigators then take those results to start their deep dive. This is the high-level work that has made firms like Parabon Nanolabs famous for solving mysteries. They trace those distant cousin matches to map out family branches, narrowing down the age and location. They cross-reference everything with birth certificates, marriage licenses, obituaries, and census records. They dig through old archives until slowly but surely they find the right path. They eventually pinpoint a small group of potential suspects for police to investigate and narrow down to one. This is the exact methodology the Pima County Sheriff's Department is currently utilizing. And that explains why the origin of the DNA on that property is so incredibly vital. Whether a sample came from a bare hand touching the patio before the gloves went on is crucial. It could determine the outcome because the quality of that biological evidence changes everything. A firm intentional grip on a rough surface leaves a very specific mark. Grabbing a heavy flower pot with your full palm creates a much better sample than a random touch. If the suspect handled those pots thinking he was safe without gloves, he left a goldmine for investigators. It means they might have a sample that goes far beyond a simple database search. They could have enough data to find a relative and build a tree that ends with a name. That is the true weight of the flower pot evidence. It is not just a minor detail. It is the central analytical question that determines if genetic genealogy will break this case wide open. The pots, the DNA source, the claims, and the significance. On March 31, 2026, Ashley Banfield reported that the attacker used Nancy Guthrie's own flower pots. He supposedly took the plants Nancy Guthrie had spent time nurturing and used them for his heinous plan. He turned something she cared for into a tool for his cold-blooded crime. He used those heavy pots to prop open the doors and clear his exit path. Before we move forward with that, we have to look at how solid that lead actually is. This info comes from one reporter and their police contacts. The Pima County Sheriff hasn't verified any of it yet. It's missing from FBI reports and hasn't been backed up by other outlets at the time we're recording this. We're treating this as a serious lead from a proven journalist, even if official verification is still pending. You should evaluate this accordingly. That distinction is crucial for your analysis. It isn't a proven fact yet. Treat it as a credible tip lacking a second source. On this channel, we always clarify that difference. Let's examine Banfield's history here. Reliability matters more than just having multiple sources. It's all about the integrity of the information chain. Ashley Banfield has been incredibly precise while covering this specific case. Her law enforcement insiders have provided details that were later proven true by officials. She's careful on camera to separate what she's heard from what is officially confirmed. A good track record doesn't make a single source a fact, but it means this isn't just noise. This is a professional with real investigative ties sharing what her sources are seeing. If these details are right, though we aren't claiming they are the entire view of the crime scene changes. 3 planters moved to prop open doors and a gate handled by someone whose DNA isn't in the system and is currently being hunted via family trees. Each object represents a major evidence point. They required a firm intentional grip to be moved into position. And they were handled in a blind spot where the suspect's gloved hands weren't seen by the front camera. No one is focusing on the timeline for when the gloves went on. Here is a perspective you won't find in any other coverage of this case. We know he was wearing gloves at the front door because the camera caught him. But the back patio isn't visible on that doorbell feed. If Banfield's sources are right, he moved those pots. So were his hands covered then? First possibility, he geared up before entering the property, touching the gate and pots with gloves on. In this scenario, he was perfectly prepared from the very start of the crime. Total discipline, complete coverage, and zero bare skin contact. He was wearing gloves when he dragged those pots and wedged the doors open. If he stayed that cautious in the dark, those planters are probably forensically clean. It's not about luck, but a total lack of carelessness throughout the event. Second possibility, he only put gloves on for the front of the house to avoid the camera. He knew the lens was there and covered up, but the back patio was the starting point. He was likely aware that area had no camera coverage. He might have moved through that zone before his forensic discipline was fully engaged. If that happened, every surface he touched out back is a massive piece of evidence. The gate, the door handles, and those flower pots could all have skin contact. Let's look at the physics of gripping a planter because the forensics are fascinating. This isn't just a light touch on a knob. A doorknob only needs a brief contact that might leave a partial print at best. But a heavy Arizona-style ceramic planter requires a full, solid grip. You'd need both hands with fingers wrapping around the curved or textured sides. You're using your palms to lift, move, and set the weight back down. That kind of contact leaves a full hand profile, not just a tiny smudge. You get multiple points of sustained contact, and terracotta is a very porous material. Porous surfaces soak up biological material much better than smooth ones. Porous clay isn't great for seeing fingerprints, but it's a goldmine for catching DNA samples, especially in the heat when you're working up a serious sweat. Tucson 2026. Even at night, those clay pots stay pretty warm. Someone's moving things in the dark, heart racing, probably sweating through their clothes. Their body is basically dumping skin cells under all that intense pressure. If they weren't wearing gloves the whole time they left a trail. It's not a question of if they left something behind. It's about whether the FBI can actually use the sample to get a name. Think about the physical labor involved. It wasn't just moving one single object. Reports suggest 3 specific things were moved: 2 doors and the back gate. That makes 3 separate times they touched something. If they did that barehanded, even once, we're looking at a pattern. Every grip left even more evidence behind. Finding the same DNA across 3 different spots would be a massive break. It proves they weren't just standing there. They were doing the heavy lifting. Moving stuff is behavioral proof. It shows what they were actually doing. We need to be very clear about what the official story actually says. To understand this case, you have to look at the holes in the public narrative. The sheriff says they found DNA, but it's not in the national system. They say they're looking into family tree testing right now, but they won't say exactly where that DNA was found. Was it the front door, the back gate, a specific flower pot? Is it just one person's DNA? Is the sample even clean enough for testing? Is it a full profile? Have they actually started the search yet? And if they have, did they find anyone? The public has 0 answers. That's why this detail about the flower pots is such a big deal. Where did that mystery DNA come from, and how did it get there? We aren't claiming to have the final answer yet. We're just laying out the facts so you can see why the missing info matters. Sheriff Nanos keeps saying the investigation is active and they're following leads. The FBI is fully involved and the lab work is ongoing. He says they're doing everything possible and believe Nancy is still alive. But he hasn't said a word about the quality or origin of that DNA. That is the official record as it stands today, but the Banfield leak points to the exact question the cops are avoiding. Here is how those genetic searches actually work. People get the timeline wrong all the time, so let's set the record straight. It's not instant like on TV. It takes a long time to get results, whether it's a private lab or the FBI's own internal team. How long it takes can vary wildly depending on the DNA itself. If the suspect has close family in the system, it can happen in days. However, if their family hasn't done those home tests, it could take months of digging. The technology isn't the problem here. It all comes down to whether there's a match in the database. How many kin have actually uploaded their genetic profiles to sites like GED Match? Having a few close cousins in the system makes the family tree grow incredibly fast. If the family stayed off the grid or avoided those ancestry kits altogether, the investigation lacks raw data, slowing the search for answers. We aren't sure which path this case follows. Public records do not show that info yet. We know for certain that genetic tracing is being used, confirmed by official PCSD statements and news reports. The hunt is on. The mystery is their progress and if the evidence is clean enough for results. C.C. Moore, the expert at Parabon Nanolabs who practically invented this method for police, often explains how the DNA's state dictates the entire outcome. Pristine single-source genetic material from the scene unlocks the full potential of this genealogical tech. Mixed messy DNA or old samples might trip up the search software. A solid grip on a clay pot beats a faint smudge on a metal handle. It's about the volume and quality left behind. This is why the exact spot the DNA was found on the Guthrie land is a vital tactical clue. Better data ensures a faster, more accurate map to the truth. That map is the key to cracking the internal breach theory. Regarding the flower pots, regular viewers know we've spent time on what we call the backdoor mole angle. This theory stems from leaked reports suggesting the perpetrator knew the layout way too well for a random person just passing through. If the pot detail is true, it adds a level of premeditation we must address. Consider the mindset required to choose those specific objects during the planning phase. You're setting up a hit where 2 back entrances and a gate must stay open. You need props to keep those doors from closing. You have a few ways to handle that. You could bring your own tools like a wedge from somewhere else. You could just wing it upon arrival, grabbing whatever is within reach. Or you could rely on items you knew were there because you had scouted the place thoroughly beforehand. Choosing Nancy's own flower pots doesn't look like improvisation. Winging it means you show up and just find something. Using those pots suggests the person either spotted them and pivoted or had them written into the script from day one. That distinction is massive when we're talking about an inside job. Imagine someone lurking right next to that yard, close enough to see the patio. Close enough to make a list of every object. Identifying 3 pots as usable tools implies an intimate level of scouting before the act. That is high-level reconnaissance. This wasn't a glance, it was a full-blown inventory. Private backyards aren't cataloged by accident or by a stranger. Then there's the empty house next door. We've mentioned that vacant spot before. The home beside Nancy Guthrie's was unoccupied, and police were checking it as a potential lookout or staging area. For someone doing serious homework, a vacant lot next door is gold. You get proximity without being noticed by the street. You can clock every arrival, every departure, and map out where the cameras can't see. You see the daily routine, you see what's on the back porch. Depending on the layout, it likely offered a direct sightline to the rear of the house. The pots, the gate latch, and the door layout were all clearly visible. A patient observer could have mapped the whole thing. We're still waiting for forensic results from that empty house. We aren't sure if they scrubbed that neighboring property as hard as Nancy's. Everyone in this group keeps asking, but the official files haven't provided an answer yet. Our investigation links a possible hideout to a lookout point and then to a thorough scouting of the back porch where specific items were used as tools during the crime. It is a solid timeline. Since they are using family trees to track DNA, every detail is vital. Each part of that trail shows us what was handled, where it happened, and why. There is a much tougher question about inside info that the flower pot detail brings up. If the suspect used Nancy Guthrie's own belongings as equipment for the act, if the plan relied on knowing those pots were there and could be used as wedges, then the preparation for this reached a level of detail that is truly chilling. Either a stalker scouted the patio long enough to find those tools or someone gave them the info. One version involves a stranger watching, the other implies someone much closer to home. Neither path is easy to think about. Investigators are likely chasing both right now. As for the DNA, specifically, whether it was left on those backyard surfaces, it tells us which scenario fits, showing how well the suspect knew the risks out back versus the front. The circle is closing. Here is what this all means and where we stand tonight. Reports from Ashley Banfield sources say the kidnapper used Nancy Guthrie's flower pots to jam open the back entrances. That is currently a single claim from one reputable reporter. It hasn't been confirmed by the police or FBI, but if those pots were actually touched, gripped and moved by a stranger that DNA won't match existing records but could show up in genealogy sites. The feds have those pots. The FBI has every bit of evidence pulled from that property. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed they collected DNA from the scene for testing. Genealogy experts are on it. We know the suspect wore gloves at the entrance. That's been verified by the FBI, but the crime didn't start at the front. It began out back. Were those gloves on before the pots were moved, or just for the cameras? No one has said. If he grabbed those pots with bare hands, he left his mark on items that are currently in a federal crime lab. If that DNA is good enough for genealogy, even a distant cousin's match means they don't need CODIS. They don't need a prior mugshot or a name in a file. They build a tree and find the family. They work toward the center, just like they did with the Golden State Killer, until they find him. The issue isn't whether the science works for this case. The Pima County Sheriff's Department already confirmed they are exploring that path. The mystery is if they have the right sample from a moment of bare-handed contact in the dark. That is the one thing we still don't know. No briefing has addressed it, but that single answer might solve everything. We are staying on this story, and we will be here when the news breaks. If you have info on Nancy Guthrie, please call the Pima County Sheriff or contact the FBI. Contact info is in the description. Nancy Guthrie is a mother and grandmother who matters to many. We will keep covering this case until we have a final answer. See you next time, but first, let's say this one more time because it is important. The main point of this video isn't just about the crime or the police work. It is a much more specific and forensically critical question. Did the person who planned every visible detail forget the one moment before the cameras were watching? Because if the answer is yes, and they touched that patio without gloves, that evidence exists. It was left behind, and federal agents are holding on to it right now. This isn't just a hunch. The genetic proof on that land is solid, and the database mismatch is officially verified. Experts are currently chasing genealogy leads. Plus, the info regarding the flower pot comes from a very reliable source at the station. The mystery of that glove is where every clue finally connects. That's the ultimate mystery. The team likely has the answer or is currently hunting it down. Either way, we'll report it once it breaks. The details in this clip are pulled from public documents, validated police briefings, and established news outlets. Any unverified rumors will be flagged as coming from just one person. No one has been tagged or suggested as a potential culprit in Nancy Guthrie going missing. This isn't a formal charge or a final ruling. We are not saying any specific individual is guilty of a crime. Detectives are still working around the clock on Nancy Guthrie's unsolved disappearance. This footage serves for news reporting and educational discussion. We often believe that high walls and affluent zip codes can shield us from the darkest parts of the world. But the chilling reality of the Nancy Guthrie case shatters that comforting illusion. True evil doesn't always kick down the front door. Sometimes it waits patiently in the shadows of our own, carefully curated backyards. It is a terrifying truth. The very sanctuaries we build can be turned against us. A calculated predator doesn't just strike blindly. They study our routines. They map out our blind spots, and they use the very things we lovingly nurture, like a simple terracotta flower pot on a quiet patio, as tools for our own destruction. This tragedy serves as a haunting reminder that absolute vigilance is our only real defense. It teaches us that security isn't just about expensive cameras and locked gates. It is about profound situational awareness. Pay attention to the quiet spaces around your home. Notice the vacant lot next door. Be mindful of who might be watching when you think you are completely alone. No fortune and no quiet neighborhood is immune to someone who plans in the dark. Protect your peace by staying awake to the realities of the world, because when meticulous preparation meets an unseen vulnerability, tragedy is often just one unlatched gate away.